Hello and welcome to day 2 of the 2021 Kyiv Jewish Forum, hosted by the Jewish Confederation of Ukraine, the Center for Jewish Impact, and the Combat Antisemitism movement. I'm Nurit Ben. We're thrilled to have you back with us for the culmination of this important annual gathering. Yesterday, we heard about many things, including the challenges and opportunities facing Jewish communities worldwide in the year ahead. We also marked the 30th anniversary of the establishment of official diplomatic ties between Ukraine and Israel. Today, we'll learn from top officials and experts on the fight against rising anti-Semitic hate speech, both online and off, and explore the high-tech prowess of Israel as a startup nation and its lessons learned for others. We'll also find out how Ukraine and Israel are collaborating in the field of health to address urgent needs, of course, most notably, the ongoing global COVID-19 pandemic. We'll also hear about the critical mission of promoting Jewish education. We're live on Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and if you miss anything, you can find a recap in your email and a full recording up soon of the 2-day event online on the forum's website, KyievJewishForum.com. Now, to get the ball rolling, I'm pleased to welcome one of the most prominent voices of Ukrainian Jewry today, the long-serving Chief Rabbi of Ukraine, Yaakov Bleich. Rabbi Bleich, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you so much.
I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to help us really kick off day 2 of this annual forum.
Thank you very, very much. So first of all, good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2. Those that have been in previous forums and those that have been yesterday understand the value and the importance of this forum and bringing together Jews from all over the world, and not only Jews, but also others that are decision makers and have an impact and understand the importance of what is happening in today's world and how it's impacting Jewish communities throughout the world, especially in Ukraine and in Israel. I want to thank our president, Boris Loshkin, who's come up with this fascinating and magnificent idea and for the third time has put it together and got it going along with his staff and assistants. This forum is taking place not long after Hanukkah. Hanukkah, the lesson of Hanukkah was how the Jewish people live a supernatural life. We don't always rely on the natural. We rely on God, and God raises us, and as we rise to our challenges, and that is the message of Hanukkah, and I think that that's the message of the rejuvenation of life in the former Soviet Union, especially in Ukraine, since its independence, where the Jewish community has come back and been able to rejuvenate itself and even think about such things as its relations with Israel and partnership with Israel. That's a very important thing because partnership is a two-way street. And Ukraine is very, very proud of all of the projects that are going on between the Jewish communities of Ukraine and Israel. And we're happy that we're not only takers, but also givers, and that we're able to do so much together, relying on Israel as a partner and Israel relying on the Ukrainian Jewish community as a partner. So enjoy the day, enjoy the forum, and remember, we are here to stay. The Jewish people will be here and will continue to add added value to every community where we are and to help build strong democracies, strong economies, and strong faith in God wherever we are.
Thanks so much, Rabbi Yaakov Bleich, and we'll be coming back to you a little bit later in our conversation about education and technology. But first, our next distinguished guest is Israel's Minister of Tourism, Yoel Razvozov. We'll be happy to hear your insights, Minister, on the relationship between Israel and Ukraine. A big part of that is tourism, and of course, in this tough time, nearly 2 years into the pandemic, that has been a major challenge.
Господин президент Владимир Зеленский, господин премьер-министр Украины Денис Шмыгаль, господин Борис Ложкин, президент Еврейской конфедерации Украины, господин Роберт Зингер, глава Центра Jewish Impact и другие участники и гости конференции. Спасибо за приглашение поучаствовать в работе Киевского еврейского форума. Для меня это честь, особенно когда форум проходит в канун 30-летия установления дипломатических отношений между Израилем и Украиной. 30 лет дипломатических отношений – это небольшой срок в исторической перспективе. Особенно в такие турбулентные времена, в которые мы живем. И тем не менее, нам удалось многого достичь в экономическом и политическом плане. Буквально пару недель назад состоялось очередное заседание межправкомиссии между странами, на которой обсуждались конкретные планы по по дальнейшему сотрудничеству в экономике. Но всегда можно и нужно больше. Если смотреть в более широком контексте, сам факт проведения вашего форума при таком высоком уровне представительства и международного охвата говорит о том, что интерес к еврейской общине Украины растет. В конце концов, мы все евреи в Украине, в Канаде, США и в других странах. И у нас у всех одна общая судьба. И сейчас в условиях мировой пандемии мы все сталкиваемся с трудностями. Ограничения на перелеты все усложняют. В качестве министра туризма я борюсь за то, чтобы эта сфера пережила эти непростые времена. Кстати, надеюсь также, что в следующие 30 лет отношений между нашими странами будут еще более тесными и продуктивными. Удачи нам всем!
Thanks so much to Minister Yoel Razvozov. And also joining us from the Israeli cabinet, we're honored to have with us Israel's Minister of Diaspora Affairs, the former Knesset member and IDF spokesperson Nachman Shai. It's a crucial role, perhaps now more than ever, maintaining and strengthening the bonds between the State of Israel and Jewish communities around the world, including, of course, in Ukraine. Minister Shai, welcome to the forum.
Dear friends, shalom. It's my honor to join all of you, Jewish leaders from around the world, for the Kyiv Jewish Forum. This event highlights the everlasting bond between our people in Israel and around the world. We are stronger when we work together as a united Jewish people. By sharing in conversation, we lift each other up and move forward towards our common destiny. This event is of a particular note because it is being held in Kyiv, a once vibrant center of Jewish culture and community. Now, on the 30th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties between Israel and Ukraine, we recognize the significance of Jewish life being reborn from the ashes. As Israel's Minister of Diaspora Affairs, I am committed to strengthening the relationship between our people in Israel, Kyiv, and throughout the globe. The State of Israel is committed to ensuring that Jewish individuals have the right to live full and happy Jewish lives wherever they may choose to live. I would like to thank you, my good friend Robert Zinger, for spearheading this forum, and wish you all much congratulations and a fruitful day of conversation. תודה רבה לכם ובהצלחה.
Let's move to the U.S. now, home to the world's largest Jewish community outside of Israel. Aaron Kyiv is the State Department's recently appointed Deputy Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. He previously served as the Jewish outreach point man for President Joe Biden's election campaign. Mr. Kyiv, thanks so much for joining us today. So tell us a bit about your impressions coming into this role with very big responsibilities, obviously. What are your biggest areas of concern or priorities?
Thank you to the Jewish Confederation of Ukraine, the Center for Jewish Impact, and the Combat Antisemitism movement for organizing this important event on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Israel and Ukraine. My name is Aaron Kyiv, and I am the U.S. Deputy Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. It is a pleasure to be with you here virtually alongside such distinguished leaders dedicated to the global fight against anti-Semitism to discuss the most pressing issues facing Jewish communities. I am grateful for the opportunity to underscore the Biden-Harris administration's deep commitment to combating anti-Semitism, both at home and abroad, as we continue to see levels of anti-Semitism rise worldwide. This summer, President nominated well-known academic and advocate Dr. Deborah Lipstadt to be the U.S. Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism with the rank of ambassador. While we look forward to welcoming the Special Envoy when she is confirmed by the U.S. Senate, it is my honor to have joined the department as the Deputy Special Envoy to help lead the fight against global anti-Semitism. On October 6th, Secretary Blinken was honored to be part of the ceremony marking the 80th anniversary of the Babin Yar massacre. Secretary Blinken spoke movingly about his stepfather's experience during the Holocaust. His stepfather was a Jew born in Poland and lost almost everyone he loved in the Holocaust. He survived Auschwitz and several other Nazi concentration camps. When Secretary Blinken's stepfather addressed the Soviet delegation in 1971, he talked about the dangers of anti-Semitism, the hard work societies must do to root out ethnic and racial hatred, and the perils of covering up the darkest periods of our history. He urged the delegation to visit Babin Yar to see the human consequences firsthand. We have witnessed an alarming rise in anti-Semitism around the world for well over a decade. One of the most shocking consequences of the Israel-Gaza escalation earlier this year is that it led to an explosion of anti-Semitic rhetoric, violence, and other incidents. This included in the United States, which experienced a startling 80% increase in anti-Semitic incidents during the month of May. We unequivocally condemn all attacks targeting Jews, Jewish places of worship, community centers, and cemeteries, as well as anti-Semitic rhetoric in the United States and abroad. As President Biden said on May 28th, in recent days we have seen that no community is immune. We must all stand together to silence these terrible and terrifying echoes of the worst chapters in world history and pledge to give hate no safe harbor. The importance of governments condemning anti-Semitic acts and rhetoric as they occur cannot be overstated. As Secretary Blinken outlined in a May interview in Israel, we all have to be attentive when we see anti-Semitism emerge anywhere, whether it's in the United States or whether it's anywhere in the world. We have to take it seriously. We have to address it. We have to deal with it. The response from the United States, Ukraine, and our partners around the world must be cooperative and comprehensive. The United States' priorities, including working together to condemn and counter anti-Semitism whenever and wherever it occurs, whether online or offline, ensuring physical security for Jewish communities, the investigation and prosecution of hate crimes, educating the public, especially youth, countering Holocaust denial and distortion, and urging countries to appoint anti-Semitism coordinators and to embrace and apply the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism inclusive of its examples. The Ukrainian parliament's adoption of the law on preventing and countering anti-Semitism in September is a step towards this goal, and we urge the Ukrainian government to join IRA as an observer. IRA, among other things, is a forum of like-minded countries to strengthen efforts to promote education, remembrance, and research about the Holocaust. For the past few years, Congress has directed $1 million annually to be spent to combat anti-Semitism globally as part of larger efforts to promote international religious freedom. The State Department has built interfaith networks in Central Europe to advocate for greater societal inclusion for members of all religious minority groups, including Jewish communities. We have supported civil society organizations in Europe to counter hate speech online by posting positive messages and memes to fight intolerance and xenophobia towards religious and marginalized communities. These efforts help raise awareness for the problem, debunk inflammatory rhetoric, and advance effective counter-narratives. At the Malmö Forum in Sweden in October, Secretary of State Blinken announced 3 meaningful and concrete national pledges which will build on our previous work so that the memories of those murdered in the Holocaust will be accurately remembered, and we will continue to work toward a world free of anti-Semitism and other forms of hate. These include a $1 million funding opportunity for a program to counter online anti-Semitic hate speech in the Middle East and North Africa, a series of international visitor leadership programs with a dual focus on confronting and countering Holocaust distortion and anti-Semitism in North Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and Latin America to engage in innovative problem-solving and share expertise and strategies with foreign government officials, teachers, community, educators, law enforcement, prosecutors, judges, faith leaders, and civil society representatives. Subject to congressional approval, $1 million for a program to support the objectives of the IRA Global Task Force Against Holocaust Denial and Distortion, including the hashtag Protect the Facts campaign. We must work together to fight anti-Semitism and intolerance in all forms and to defend the values and freedoms that protect human rights and dignity for everyone. As President Biden said in early December, we have to stand against the resurgence of this tide of anti-Semitism and other forms of intolerance and hate here at home and around the world. The United States is steadfast and its ongoing commitment to counter rising global anti-Semitism, we will not cease in our efforts to turn the tide of hate around the world. We look forward to continuing to partner with all of you. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today.
And next, we'd like to welcome former U.S. Special Envoy for Monitoring and Combating Anti-Semitism, Ilan Carr, who's also a Combat Anti-Semitism Movement Advisory Board member. During his 2 years at the State Department in the administration of former President Donald Trump, Mr. Carr led the country's efforts to confront anti-Semitism around the world, spearheading a number of groundbreaking initiatives. Mr. Carr, as always, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thanks for being part of the forum.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. And it's a special pleasure to follow my good friend, Aaron Kayak. And I want to congratulate him for assuming the role of Deputy Special Envoy and now acting Special Envoy. And I know he's going to do a terrific job.
Well, so I'm sure you'll have a few tips for him within our conversation. But let me ask you, you played a central role in the very first Kyiv Jewish Forum where you spent time in Ukraine. What can you say about sort of why this forum itself is so important?
Oh, well, this forum is so deeply important. And I want to acknowledge and salute my good friend Boris Loshkin and his great team at the Jewish Confederation of Ukraine for putting this incredibly important forum on. You know, it's critical for two reasons. One is to educate about and to celebrate the breathtaking Jewish history of Ukraine. I mean, this is a deep, robust Jewish history of many, many centuries. And not only Kyiv, of course, where this forum is held, but literally from Dnipro to Lviv, right, from eastern to western Ukraine and everywhere in the middle, Kyiv being right in the center, and of course Uman being south of Kyiv. The history of the Jewish people in Ukraine is remarkable and extraordinary. One cannot talk about the Ashkenazi Jewish heritage of Europe without talking about the Ukrainian Jewish community. For all the centuries it's been there. So it's remarkably important to celebrate that history and that lineage, and also, of course, to mourn and to understand how that community, or so many, a large percentage of that community came to an end in the Holocaust. So that's one reason why this forum is so deeply important. The second reason it's so deeply important is to celebrate Ukraine today and how stunning has been the transformation of Ukraine. Look, we know during the Holocaust, far too many Ukrainians were enthusiastic collaborators with the Nazis in the extermination of the Jewish population of Ukraine. But today, truly, there is a culture of philo-Semitism in Ukraine. This is a breathtaking transformation. And of course, no country is perfect. There's anti-Semitism everywhere in the world, and there's some anti-Semitism in Ukraine. But, you know, one thing I said when I was at the very first Jewish Forum 3 years ago, is that in the election for the president of Ukraine, where candidate Zelensky was leading in the polls over the incumbent by 40 points, the Jewishness of then candidate Zelensky was never an issue in that presidential campaign. Of course, Zelensky won the election and now has been president of Ukraine. How grateful are we that he joined us yesterday in this Kyiv Jewish Forum. But, you know, this is a remarkable story. And so if we really want to fight anti-Semitism, it's not enough to just point to the bad stories in the world. There are too many of those, of course. But we also have to hold up and champion the really excellent stories in the fight against anti-Semitism. Ukraine is a very, very important story in that global fight against anti-Semitism, despite the fact that some of Ukraine's neighbors have been trying to promote a story about Ukraine that is contrary to reality and undermining this incredible transformation of Ukraine from anti-Semitism decades ago to, in many respects, philo-Semitism today.
Ilan, a really important thing to mention that, as you say, really isn't mentioned enough. A lot of times in conversations about anti-Semitism, it's very much a perspective that it's almost an insurmountable mountain to climb and that it's always going to be there. And while that might be true, there are cases, like you say, of change that we can look to, and it's important to be reminded of those. Let me ask you a little more broadly then, how do you think these very strong Jewish communities play a role in the relationship itself between Ukraine, the United States, and Israel?
Oh, very important. Again, Ukraine is an anchor of the Ashkenazi Jewish community of Europe. And of course, Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people and home to the largest Jewish community in the world. The United States, the largest diaspora Jewish community in the world. This is a critically important relationship. You can look, for example, at this is one issue I dealt with extensively when I was in Ukraine. Look at the Israeli tourism to Ukraine. Uman is a perfect example. I mentioned that in my answer to your last question. You know, the pilgrimages to Uman every year by so many Israelis and some Americans as well is a perfect example. There has to be cross-pollination, an understanding of the remarkable, story of the Ukrainian Jewish community and how it relates today. There's a reason why the largest Jewish community center in the world is in Dnipro, the Menorah Center, right? It's not only for the Ukrainian Jewish community, it's for the world Jewish community to come to Ukraine and to connect with that Ashkenazi heritage. And we're seeing that all the time. We're seeing that those relationships between the US and Ukrainian Jewish community and the Israeli and Ukrainian Jewish community in terms of visits and cultural understanding and the centers that are being built. And so it's incredibly important to continue that cross-pollination so that the Jewish communities of the world understand each other and maintain that connection of Am Yisrael throughout the world.
If we're talking about cross-pollination, then let's take it to a different direction, which is interfaith issues and initiatives. I know that's something that you've done extensively and with a lot of success. Tell us a little bit about maybe lessons learned from those kinds of interfaith initiatives. What can come of them, what results you've seen, and maybe, what a country like Ukraine and Israel, for that matter, can take from that.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's not only interfaith, it's interethnic. And right, I think the key in the fight against anti-Semitism is so much of what we do is defensive, but to fight anti-Semitism, we have to go on the offense, and that is to promote interethnic and interfaith appreciation, affection, understanding, right? It's not enough, we talk too often of tolerance. Tolerance is nice. I mean, we'll settle for it, but really what we want is affection, understanding, appreciation between cultures, between ethnicities, and yes, between faiths. And that's what we're seeing, in some of the work I did in my 2 years as U.S. Special Envoy, but also we're seeing this in a number of global initiatives where we are promoting interfaith, interethnic understanding. And, the Abraham Accords are a perfect example, where it's not just a piece that's on a piece of paper, but it's a real embrace between cultures, between ethnicities, and between religions. And that really is the future in the fight against anti-Semitism. And in that regard, let me say, this is why it's so important also to strengthen US-Ukrainian relations. Ukraine is a remarkably important ally of the United States. My portfolio at the State Department was anti-Semitism, but I can tell you as a US diplomat, how much we appreciate the US-Ukrainian alliance. And let me tell you personally, I spent a year serving in Iraq in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and I served shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainian soldiers who were part of our coalition, a coalition, by the way, of former Soviet republics and former Soviet satellites in Iraq, fighting for justice and democracy and liberation. A remarkable story. And I had the enormous honor of serving together with these very brave Ukrainian troops in Iraq. That's just one of many examples of how important is the United States-Ukrainian relationship. And I want to take this opportunity to say that the United States must stand with Ukraine against all external aggression. Ukraine is a wonderful country. It's an independent country, and it has every right to govern itself, free of the rapacious designs of its neighbors. And so I hope the United States stands strongly and squarely with Ukraine. I was encouraged by Secretary Blinken's statements to that regard. I think we've got to make that loud and clear that the United States and Ukraine are allies and will continue to be allies.
Ilan Carr, as always, thank you so much for being with us and sharing all of that knowledge and especially lessons learned from your experience of dealing with all of this on the front line. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
And we're going to open this up now to a wider discussion on really the most important issue at the heart of this forum. The past year has seen a disturbing rise in anti-Semitism around the world, including an unchecked surge of hate speech targeting Jews, particularly online. Joining us now, a very special panel of guests, among them several of the world's top officials tasked with fighting anti-Semitism at both the national and international levels. I want to welcome Ukraine's Minister of Internal Affairs, Denis Monastyrsky, Canadian Special Envoy on Preserving Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism, Dr. Erwin Kotler, OAS Commissioner to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism, Fernando Lautenberg, and head of the Israeli Foreign Ministry's Bureau for World Jewish Affairs and World Religions, Shuli Davidovich. Also joining the conversation, European Commission Coordinator on Combating Anti-Semitism and Fostering Jewish Life, Katerina von Schnurbein. And to lead the discussion, let's now welcome back Robert Singer, Chairman of the Center for Jewish Impact and Senior Advisor to the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement. Robert, great to have you back here. I'll turn it back over to you.
Dear friends and the panel participants and our audience tuning from all over the world, today, just a few weeks after the commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the Babi Yar massacre, I would like to present to you a few disturbing statistics published by European Union and some other agencies on the state of anti-Semitism in Europe and the worst crime in human history, the Holocaust, occurred less than span of a human lifetime ago. More than 80% of young European Jews say today anti-Semitism is a problem in their country. And 44% of them have themselves experienced anti-Semitic harassment. Due to this situation, about 38% of European Jews say they are considering immigration. Let us remember the Jewish population of the European Union is already estimated to be no larger than 1.5 million people, a far cry from the pre-World War II population of 9.5 million. Ukraine has long been home to one of the world's largest significant Jewish communities, which has experienced both great triumphs and horrific tragedies. I am very pleased to represent the Center for Jewish Impact and Global Antisemitism Movement and host this important panel discussion today, featuring many key high-level allies from different continents who are deeply committed to the Jewish people and the worldwide fight against anti-Semitism. Before we begin the panel, we will first hear remarks from the Ukraine's Minister of Internal Affairs, of Denis Monastyrsky, who will share with us what steps the Ukrainian government is taking to fight anti-Semitism in the country. Minister Monastyrsky, welcome. Маю честь представити нашого першого спікера, міністра внутрішніх справ України, пана Дениса Монастирського. Він поділиться з нами своїм баченням щодо теми антисемітизму в Україні. Будь ласка, шановний пане міністр.
Дякую вам за запрошення взяти участь у цьому важливому форумі. Маю велику приємність долучитись до відкриття цього міжнародного заходу, покликаного сприяти великій справі подальшого поглиблення українсько-єврейського порозуміння. Маю відзначити, що проведення вже третього за ліком Київського єврейського форуму свідчить про актуальність існування такого формату, який збирає до гурту владу, громадськість, представників експертного середовища, релігійних діячів, бізнес та багато інших з України та за кордону. Всіх, кому не байдужі питання українсько-єврейського діалогу. Адже це нагода поділитися своїми поглядами на сьогодення і розвиток юдейської спільноти, боротьби з антисемітизмом, збереження пам'яті про Голокост, вшанування жертв Бабиного Яру тощо. Як міністр внутрішніх справ України хотів би приділити увагу трьом аспектам, що лежать в полі зору МВС України. Перше і ключове – це антисемітизм. Хочу впевнено сказати, цьому явищу в Україні місця немає і не буде. Система МВС, до якої входить Національна поліція, Національна гвардія, Державна служба надзвичайних ситуацій, прикордонники та міграційна служба докладає максимум зусиль для недопущення будь-яких маніпуляцій і спроб розбрату суспільства на основі національних особливостей чи віросповідання, сіяння ворожнечі через суб'єктивне трактування історичного минулого чи пропаганди новітніх штучних гіпотез міжетнічної ненависті. Ми добре розуміємо, що подібні суспільні прояви печерного невігластва є все ще живучими і доволі небезпечними, здатними стати надзвичайно серйозною гібридною зброєю у проведенні ворожих спеціальних інформаційних операцій проти нашої держави. Як свідчить статистика, за 11 місяців цього року в Україні відкрито 10 кримінальних проваджень за фактом вчинення таких дій. Більшість таких правопорушень пов'язані зі звичайним хуліганством, але не є проявами ненависті. У більшості з цих проваджень фігурантам повідомлено про підозру. Проводяться необхідні подальші слідчі дії для притягнення осіб до відповідальності. Більшість цих справ знаходяться на особистому контролі керівництва Національної поліції, і стан їх розслідування регулярно перевіряється. Крім того, ведеться послідовна робота над профілактикою та запобіганням вчинення такого роду протиправних дій. Наше міністерство працює прозоро і відкрито. За попередньо досягненою домовленістю ми щомісяця обмінюємося усією важливою інформацією щодо виявлених проявів антисемітизму з Єврейською конфедерацією України і налаштовані на продовження такого співробітництва. Друге. Ми всі чудово знаємо, що в 18 столітті в Україні виникла релігійна течія юдаїзму – хасидизм. Засадничим принципом духовних переконань хасидів є паломництво до могил їхнього духовного наставника. Популярними місцями хасидського паломництва в Україні, крім найвідоміших Умані й Меджибожа, є також Мукачево, Белз, Бердичів, Браслав, Гадяч, Сагдгора. Традиційно щороку в період Рош-Кашана відбувається масштабне паломництво братславських хасидів до могили цадіха Нахмана в місті Умань. Гарантувати проведення цього заходу в умовах безпеки та порядку – надзвичайно важливе завдання для нас. МВС України щоразу виділяє значну кількість правоохоронців, військовослужбовців та рятувальників для належного супроводження цього заходу. Цього року в Україну прибуло близько 30 тисяч вірян з різних країн світу. Усі заходи були проведені на високому рівні. В цьому нам також допомагають наші колеги з держави Ізраїль, надсилаючи в придані сили поліцейських та рятувальників безпосередньо з Ізраїля. Ми щиро вдячні за таку плідну взаємодію. Третє і не менш важливе питання, над яким міністерство працює останні кілька років, є подолання проблемних явищ в імплементації українсько-ізраїльської угоди про безвізові поїздки громадян, що була підписана між Кабінетом міністрів України та урядом держави Ізраїль у 2010 році. Йдеться про значну кількість відмов громадянам України у перетинанні державного кордону держави Ізраїль, так і про недопуск окремих громадян Ізраїлю при в'їзді до нашої країни. З огляду на пандемію COVID-19 та без запровадження обмежень на перетин кордону Ізраїлю та України іноземцями, у 2020-2021 роках згадане питання тимчасово втратило свою гостроту. Однак з відновленням подорожей подібні ситуації можуть знову мати місце. Неодноразові спроби Міністерства внутрішніх справ врегулювати наявну проблему шляхом проведення міжвідомчих нарад та ініціювання окремих рішень до успіху поки що не призвели. Тому до вирішення цієї проблеми пропоную підійти комплексно, як на рівні правоохоронних органів, експертних та політичних кіл. Наше завдання – виробити такий механізм, який був би ефективним та влаштовував обидві сторони. Українці та євреї живуть пліч-опліч на українських землях уже майже 2000 років. Нарізно і спільно вони сплели полотно культурної, мовної і історичної спадщини сучасної України. Тривалі періоди мирного співіснування переривалися роками трагедій, які розділяли людей різними доленосними переживаннями і суперечливими наративами. Врешті-решт, обидва народи зуміли відновити свою державність, на алтар якої лягли роки жертовної боротьби найкращих наших представників. Сучасні дружні держави Україна та Ізраїль схожі своїм цивілізаційним вибором та продовженням боротьби за існування. Адже не випадково Ізраїль став однією з перших країн, які визнали Україну як незалежну державу і встановив з нею дипломатичні відносини. Таким чином склалось так, що діалог між етнічними українцями та євреями переріс у діалог між двома націями, які у ХХ столітті набули власної державності. Скажу без перебільшення, для дещо молодшої в сучасному вимірі України історія відновленого Ізраїля є красномовним прикладом того, як виборювати, досягати, будувати і зберігати державну незалежність. Передумову для величі і свободи будь-якої нації. Глибоко переконаний, що шляхом підтримки одне одного на міжнародній арені поглиблені розуміння широти, складності та різноманітності українсько-єврейських відносин протягом століть, збереження вільного безвізового режиму подорожей, нам судилось будувати взаємовигідне і процвітаюче майбутнє дорогих нам України та Ізраїлю. Користаємось цією нагодою. Дякую вам за увагу.
Дякую, пане Minister, and thank you so much. And obviously, as you said, there are over 1,000 years of joint history of Jewish people in Ukraine. And now to the panel. I'll switch back to English. And I'll start with Shuli Davidovich, the head of Israeli Foreign Ministry Bureau for World Jewish Affairs and World Religions. Mrs. Davidovich, what role must the Israeli government play in the global fight against anti-Semitism?
Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you very much for inviting me and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to attend such a timely and important forum. We appreciate very much what the Ukraine government is doing to promote the fight against anti-Semitism and Holocaust remembrance. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel is leading the efforts of the Israeli efforts to unite and to join hands in this global challenge. With the unique presence in 180 cities, capitals, and other cities around the world via our embassies and consulates, the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs is working together with different governments, parliaments, local authorities, civil societies, heads of churches and other religions, rectors of universities, and many others, really to fight this global challenge, whether it comes from the right, from the left, from the Muslim communities. One of our main tools is, of course, and maybe the most important one, is the IRA definition of defining anti-Semitism, which is a tool how to bring to justice those who perpetrate and act in an anti-Semitic way. And there are many manifestations of anti-Semitism today. So what the Israeli government is doing, first of all, as I said, talking to other governments. I have here together other representatives of other governments, and of course the EU and other international organizations. We are sharing the same table. We are sharing the same tools. We are united in the fight. We hold annual dialogues. We talk together to the big technology societies and organizations and companies in order to take off some hate speech which spread globally.
Thank you, Shuli, and good luck in your new position, and I'm sure you'll do a fantastic job for all of us. My next question is to an old friend, Canadian Special Envoy on Preserving Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Antisemitism, Dr. Erwin Kotler. Mr. Kotler, first of all, congratulations on your recent reappointment as Canada's Special Envoy on Preserving Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Antisemitism. I know you have developed a multi-point action plan for fighting anti-Semitism. Can you elaborate on the details of this initiative and what it makes it so unique?
Thank you, Robert. It's good to see you and to participate in this Kyiv Jewish Forum on the subject of anti-Semitism and hate speech, which is as timely as it is necessary. For anti-Semitism is not only the oldest, the longest, most enduring, and most virulent of hatreds. It is, as Ahmed Shahid pointed out in his landmark report on anti-Semitism to the United Nations, it is toxic to democracies. It is an assault on our common humanities, and it is, in effect, the canary in the mineshaft of global evil today. And we have been witnessing in Canada an alarming rise in hate speech, both online and offline. And that reached a tipping point in the Hamas war, where Jews were threatened and targeted in their neighborhoods and in the streets, on the campuses and in their communities, where synagogues were torched, Holocaust memorials defaced, cemeteries desecrated, Jewish institutions vandalized, the whole resulting, in terms of empirical data, in the largest rise of anti-Semitic hate crimes ever. By May 2021, we had reached the level of hate crimes for all of 2020, which had been the highest level ever. So accordingly, and this goes directly now to your question, the Canadian government convened the first ever national summit to combat anti-Semitism. Whereas Special Envoy, I shared a 10-point action plan to combat anti-Semitism, and this was followed by express country pledges that the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, made on behalf of Canada at the Malmo International Forum on Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism. And let me now just identify in a series of one-liners what that action plan and country pledges include. Number one, the enhancing of the teaching of the Holocaust, but also the teaching about anti-Semitism across generational lines. Number two, combating the alarming rise in Holocaust distortion and joining together with IRA, UNESCO in the Protect the Facts campaign. Number three, enhancing the adoption and implementation of the IRA working definition on anti-Semitism, which is not only the most authoritative and comprehensive and international definition we have, but what is not so well known, it is the most representative. It was democratically adopted over a 15-year period by governments, intergovernmental bodies, parliaments, civil society leaders, scholars, and the like. So we have here a democratically adopted definition that was transparently adopted over a 15-year period. Number four, the combating of hate crimes through the 4 Ps, as we call it: the prevention of such hate crimes to begin with, the protection of the targeted victims, the prosecution of the perpetrators, and partnerships between federal, provincial, municipal governments, and civil society. Number five, combating the alarming, indeed incendiary rise of hate speech on the social media. And the Canadian Parliament and the Canadian government have initiated legislation in that regard, which I hope will be adopted in 2022. Number six, a zero tolerance policy with respect to hate speech. That means not an anti-Semitism. That means not only calling out anti-Semitism in the other's political party, but calling it out in one's own political party, and to guard against the weaponization of anti-Semitism for partisan political purposes. This must be an all-party, all civil society involvement. Number seven, the importance of allyship, where targeted minorities work in concert together to combat anti-Semitism. Number eight, combating the laundering of anti-Semitism under universal public values. I'm referring to the laundering of anti-Semitism under the protective cover of the United Nations, under the authority of international law, under the culture of human rights, and even under the very struggle against racism itself, where Jews are held out to be, for example, part of the white oppressor class, or held out to be apologists for the white oppressor regime, Israel, in the Middle East. So these kinds of stereotypical anti-Semitic dynamics must be combated. And finally, the combating of hate speech, the combating of anti-Semitism cannot be the responsibility of the Jewish community alone, nor can it be the responsibility of one state alone. It must be the collective responsibility of governments, of parliaments, of civil society, and the like. In a word, this is a global threat, as I said, an assault on our common humanity, a threat and toxic to all democracies, and it requires a global response and a global action plan, and we look forward to being part of this under your leadership, Robert, and the actions of those joining us on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erwin. Thank you for this systematic approach, and obviously having somebody at your statue in Helm in Canada is extremely important. Not forgetting that there are at least well over 1 million former Ukrainians who live today in Canada, and this connection to Ukraine and to Kyiv Forum is extremely important. And now let's go to OAS, Organization of American States, Commissioner to Monitor and Combat Antisemitism. Another friend, Fernando Lottenberg. Mr. Lottenberg, your position of Commissioner to Monitor and Combat Antisemitism for the Organization of American States is a new one. Tell us a bit about why creating this role was necessary and what is your mission there?
Okay, Robert, thank you for your invitation, and my friends, Mr. Schnurbein, Mr. Kotler, Mrs. Davidovich, it's a pleasure to be with you. When I was invited to this meeting, I said I could not decline an invitation coming from the city where my grandmother was born. So even virtually, it's a pleasure and an honor to be in Kyiv with you. First of all, Robert, let me explain a little bit about the OAS, that it's the world's oldest regional organization, dating back to the International Conference of American States, which was held in Washington, D.C. in 1889 to 1890. And that meeting approved the establishment of the International Union of the American Republics. And later on, in 1948, already after the Second World War, we have the current format of the OAS that came into being with its charter signed in Bogota, Colombia. And its pillars are democracy, human rights, security, and development. What has a lot to do with the approach that we intend to give to this mission that was designed by Secretary General Luis Almagro, because he believes the American continent and its main political organization is already ripe to have a function like this, which has already its pairs in the European Union and countries like Canada and United States, OSCE, and other organizations. And he asked me especially to foster, as Professor Kotler said, the most important and relevant definition of anti-Semitism in the Americas in its 35 countries which integrate the organization, which is the IRA definition. Not as a binding definition, not as a legal instrument, but something operational that can help people and authorities and the press to identify when we are facing anti-Semitism. And we have seen in the Americas, as Professor Kotler mentioned in Canada, the same issues in many other countries. It has to do, first of all, with the traditional anti-Semitism that comes from the right, the white supremacists, the neo-Nazis that we have seen in Charlottesville with the march when they were saying Jews would not replace us, or in Pittsburgh with the shooting of 11 people at the synagogue Tree of Life 3 years ago. We had other incidents in the continent. I'd like to mention especially the EMEA and the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires in 94 and 92, with an expression of the Islamic fundamentalist anti-Semitism in our region. And we have also seen, coming from the far left during the conflicts with Israel and Hamas, demonstrations saying that Israel is an apartheid state and the Star of David is the same thing as a swastika. This happened just before my window in this neighborhood in São Paulo. And as Mr. Jonathan Greenblatt said during the ADL meeting, never is now, slowly but surely the temperature is rising. There are occasional storms, but too often people choose to ignore the signs and deny that there is a pattern. But by all measures, the metaphorical temperature is climbing, the conditions worsening, and this situation threatens to upend life as we know it. So even if we are dealing with the old tropes that came back during the pandemics, already mentioned by Professor Kotler, that the Jews own the pharmaceutical companies, that, for instance, I was a witness in a lawsuit 2 weeks ago here in Brazil when a journalist published in his Facebook page that no Israelis were contaminated by COVID because they introduced it to the world. I even wrote an article 1 year ago in a Brazilian weekly magazine called The Virus of Prejudice. And we have seen recently in a few countries, more in Europe than in the Americas, anti-vaxxers wearing yellow stars in a preposterous comparison to Holocaust victims. And as I said, in the other side of the spectrum, the new face of the anti-Semitism as a demonization of the state of Israel and putting it as a racist or endeavor, as it's mentioned in the IRA. So I think we have seen in a few countries also good news. It's not only bad news. And I'd like to share with you some things that have happened in Brazil during these last months. We produced a guide to identify hate speech with the help of a law school here in São Paulo, which aims to help police officers, prosecutors, and judges to characterize and sanction anti-Semitism. We have been closer to social providers such as YouTube and TikTok to have the Jewish organizations recognized as trusted flaggers, identifying and reporting anti-Semitic posts in order to have them monitored and removed with a fast-track mechanism. The Brazilian Supreme Court 3 weeks ago equated racial insult to racism, which has a more severe treatment and legal sanctions. Brazil was accepted as an observer member of the IHRA, and a bill also, as it happens in Canada, is being debated at the Brazilian House of Representatives. We hope that it's approved also even this year or the beginning of next year to regulate social media and fake news. And I believe that in this case that we should draw our attention to find a way to balance self-regulation by the social providers with legal regulation by the public administration, by the governments, in order, and with the courts' decisions to find a new approach to stop the spreading of the hate speech in which anti-Semitism goes along. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fernando. And it's good to know that in São Paulo we have such a prominent Jewish leader of Ukrainian descent, and it's another connection to this forum. Katarina, it's great to see you again. My first question for you is how to coordinate the pan-European fight against anti-Semitism at the EU level when each country has different domestic policies on this issue.
Hi, Robert. It's good to see you and all the other discussants. Indeed, yes, it is a challenge, and I think it is a challenge with regards to all EU policy because we are a very diverse continent. But I believe we are really united when it comes to anti-Semitism. We understand very well on European level that we can do a lot, but unless it trickles down and it is embraced and echoed by the member states of the EU, by cities, by civil society, actually we will not achieve the goal which is at the heart of this strategy for Jews to see a future for themselves and for their children here in Europe. So for us, it is key to work together closely with the member states and the national authorities to work with the Jewish communities in order to make sure that we work also in their interest and with regards to their necessities and their ideas, and to make sure that the activities that we have and the initiatives that are part of this strategy actually serve the purpose. There are over 70 initiatives, and we pledged as European Union at Malmö and President von der Leyen herself, 70 different initiatives, some of them on European level and others on national level. And I think it's this interplay that actually helps us, each in our own competences, to move forward. For example, when it comes to hate speech online, the EU has a clear competence. There is a legal framework which, for example, criminalizes Holocaust denial and trivialization. We have now started infringement procedures with regards to those member states who have not yet implemented this piece of legislation correctly. But then it is, of course, once it is implemented on national level, for the member states to ensure that there is also proper prosecution of haters online and offline, to also against those who spread Holocaust denial or trivialization, and that these are being brought to justice. So it's really the connection between the two, and even further down levels to the local and the city level, that can make us successful. I believe it's also important to use the existing structures when it comes to uniting the European countries on European level. For example, there have been 2 Council conclusions in 2018 and 2020 that are very clear with regards to pushing back on anti-Semitism, where member states already pledged to have national strategies on anti-Semitism. And I believe with this European strategy, there is a good example also in terms of structures and the different areas that need to be covered. Security is a responsibility above all for member states, and the security of Jewish communities must be in the interest of the state, just as any other for any other citizen. And so we on European level can support it, for example, with different projects, also intercommunal projects, but it is for the member states to ensure that Jewish premises and Jewish communities are secure, and that the funding for these measures does not rest with the community. The European Commission based this strategy very strongly on the IRA definition, which has been mentioned before, and we encourage member states to also adopt it. And in order to support its use, we have, together with the IRA, issued this year a handbook on the practical use of the IRA definition. So, it's really this interplay, I think, that helps us to advance on the various levels.
Thank you, Katerina. And as you said, the key is to work together both on European level and on a global level. And the vast experience of people sitting on this panel and presenting on this panel is absolutely amazing. And the way that you succeed to work on a global level and exchange the best practices is obviously the right thing in the right direction. I would like to go back to the Israeli Foreign Minister, to Mrs. Davidovich. What are the most troubling contemporary anti-Semitic trends worldwide from Israel's perspective?
So you rightly said, Robert, that there are a number of troubling trends. We can't speak on one only. There is, of course, the trend of anti-Semitism that comes from the far right. We hear different politicians speaking in different ways. We see anti-Semitic activities that come from the right. Just now, as you rightly described in the beginning of our panel, that there were a number of anti-Semitic attacks. Now in the days of Hanukkah in East Europe, in the US and in other places. Another very troubling trend is anti-Semitism that comes from the right, from the far or extreme left, where we see normalization of hate speech, where even politicians use language that normalize anti-Israeli activities or anti-Israeli sentiments that really is an anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish manifestation. Of course, there is also anti-Semitism that comes from the Muslim world. We hear imams. Of course, we know activities such of the Qatar government that brings money to campuses and other places. We see a worrying trend of Holocaust distortion and disrespect, and we see a very sharp rise in hate speech in the different social media outlets, as Irving said, and also Fernando. One of the importance of the ARA definition is the fact that we cannot tolerate any hate speech, and we cannot tolerate any anti-Israeli activity or anti-Semitism that actually is a different manifestation of Jew hatred. And when we hear different politicians talking about Israel as an apartheid state, that after that is translated to attacks against Jews around the world, this is something that is extremely worrying, and we need to work together against it. One other very worrying trend is, and maybe the most poisoning environment today, is in the campuses, where Jewish students on a daily basis are being attacked because they are Jews, because they have relatives in Israel, because they identify with the state of Israel. Of course, we saw it in May when there was the front and the violence in the south. And not only Jewish students told us, we cannot identify with Israel, we cannot write things in social media in favor of Israel, because not only our peers in the academia will attack us, but also our professors in the universities, and they might hurt our scores and grades, and they are afraid of talking Hebrew and wearing Magen David, and telling that they are Jews on the campuses. We saw some activities of unions of different universities, such as in Duke University or in Toronto University. In Toronto University, for example, the union have decided that kosher food cannot be brought into the campus unless it does not have any contact with Israeli companies. So it's not only anti-Israeli activity, it's really anti or Jewish hatred activities. These are only some examples, and for that we really need a united effort here if we want to take off any kind of anti-Semitic activities in the social media. It's not only those who read and see those kind of manifestation, but it's the Israeli government, it's the government of Canada, it's the governments of Latin American countries, this is the EU. We all need to have a joint conversation with the social media. Now, Katerina was talking about security of Jewish people. It's not only today security of Jewish institutions, schools, and synagogues, etc. We're talking about security of Jewish people in the social media, that people are, young men and women are attacked on the social media only because they are Jews and only because they are associate themselves with Israel. And this is something that all of us should not tolerate, and we should work together. So, of course, there are also some positive activities and positive trends. But unfortunately, if FBI figures show that today one out of three Jews in America and elsewhere feels unsecure and was attacked in a different ways of anti-Semitism. It means that the world is not safe today to be Jewish, and we need to work together on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Shuli. And taking from here to Canada, Professor Kotler, with your decades-long experience in the field of fighting anti-Semitism, which new trends of manifestations of Jew hatred pose the greatest threats?
Okay, I'll just share with you just some trends that I find most disconcerting. The first is what I would call the mainstreaming, the normalization, the legitimation of anti-Semitism in the political culture, the absence of outrage underpinned by indifference and inaction. The second has been the phenomenon of this toxicity in the campus culture, and Julie has mentioned that, but this is something that we find is metastasizing in the campus culture, and that underpins the overall normalization in the culture as a whole. The third thing is the globalization phenomenon. In other words, the anti-Semitism that we are witnessing today is not only globalized, but what happens, for example, in London and Paris, not only reverberates in Montreal and Toronto, but is replicated in Montreal and Toronto. For example, when you had a convoy that went through the streets of London, England, saying, "F the Jews will rape your daughters," you had a similar convoy going through streets in Canada saying the same things. So you had not only the globalization phenomenon, but the orchestration of it in international terms. A fourth dynamic is the marginalization of the combating of anti-Semitism within the struggle against racism itself. And while we must be concerned, for example, here in Canada with systemic racism against Indigenous people, Blacks, people of color, Asian, Canadians, bigotry against Muslims, what we are finding is that anti-Semitism is being marginalized in that struggle against racism. And this leads to the last point that I want to mention, and one of the more insidious ones, and that is anti-Semitism is actually laundered under the very cover of anti-racism. So not only is the struggle against racism marginalizing anti-Semitism in that struggle, but the struggle against racism is being instrumentalized with respect to incentivizing anti-Semitism. So these are the dynamics that we're witnessing here in Canada, but which have, as I say, a global connection and follow.
Thank you, Erwin. And Mr. Lautenberg, how common is Jewish hatred in the Americas? And how much influence do foreign elements such as Iran-backed Hezbollah have in spreading anti-Semitism ideology in your countries?
Well, you know, Robert, that Latin America is a continent that was formed under the wings of the counter-reform. So we had the reform in Germany and other countries in Europe, and the counter-reform based on the persecution of the so-called heretic thoughts and people was very strong in the continent. Indeed, we had in some countries of Latin America tribunals of the Inquisition who tried the so-called Judaizers, judaizantes in Spanish. And in Brazil, although we did not have tribunals, we had visitations from the Inquisition, which lasted 3 centuries. So this leaves a culture that is still felt in some parts of the continent, despite the efforts made by the Catholic Church, especially after the Vatican Council 55 years ago. Is still something that perspires some traditional anti-Semitism. Regarding the Islamic fundamentalism that you mentioned, we have seen before, especially in Argentina, with the attacks against the Israeli embassy and against Temia in the 90s, its strength. And while we were at the front of the Jewish Federation of Brazil, and we have met many times, we pushed for an approval of a new anti-terrorism law that was very effective and thwarted some attempts of attack during the Olympics, which were conducted in Rio de Janeiro a few years ago. So it's not something that we see very concretely all the time, but we know they are there, and they have the support and the welcoming of some of the governments in the region, especially in Venezuela, where you see a presence and an importance of Iran and Hezbollah very strong, and which cannot be explained by normal means. There is something added to their presence, and we have all to be alert all the time so that episodes like happening in Buenos Aires cannot repeat themselves in our countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. Very disturbing. Katarina, what is the unique about the EU strategy to combat anti-Semitism and mainly foster Jewish life that makes it different from past initiatives?
Robert, I believe with this strategy, we're really turning a page. It's the first of its kind, the first ever EU strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. So the two together, it's a strong political statement, really the expression of the EU and its determination to put an end to anti-Semitism and to commit to a future for Jewish life in Europe. Now, we know that this hatred is age-old and it's not going to happen overnight, but very clearly the avenues are being put in place. First of all, to address anti-Semitism in all its specificities. So to recognize all forms of anti-Semitism as equally pernicious, with regards also to Israel-related anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, but also Holocaust denial and distortion, as was already mentioned. But also, I believe it's important to recognize this everyday anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism that comes in casual remarks at the workplace that can be very disturbing for Jews. And then, of course, the more traditional right and left and Islamist extremist forms of anti-Semitism and how to address it always together with the member states. I would like to give you a concrete example. For example, as Shuli mentioned, anti-Semitism on campus is a real challenge. And one thing we have done now as part of this strategy is to equip the European Union of Jewish students with a large grant for them to support projects of their affiliates in the different universities across Europe to highlight Jewish life, to address anti-Semitism, and to be visible with their activities on campus. So the strategy in that sense is very concrete. We also are determined, as we see now, a change with regards to Holocaust remembrance in the course of this strategy, which is laid out for 10 years. As survivors are passing away, and we need to adapt to a more diverse society and also a digital sphere. So all of this means that we will need new forms of remembrance, and we want to develop those together with experts and of course also the Jewish community. And again, there is funding available for this, so I think this is also important. It's not just words, it's concrete actions and the funding that is provided. For example, one initiative is a project called Where the Holocaust Happened, to show how local it was and to show in local circumstances there were houses where Jews were hidden, deportation sites, so that also today when we see these sites, and these places where today, of course, you don't necessarily see any traces, but we can be reminded of what does it mean today when we see anti-Semitism rising again, and how do we need to speak up against it. Then, of course, on a more long-term and also a broader scale is the aspect of education. So curricula is one thing, but really it is also about the training of teachers and ensuring that member states will have programs at hand to train not only the history teacher or the religious teacher, but also, the sports teacher. Everyone needs to recognize anti-Semitism and needs to be equipped to address it when it occurs. And in order to substantiate this and support it, we want to create a European research hub not only on the Holocaust, because that basically exists with the European Holocaust Remembrance Infrastructure since 2010, but really with regards to addressing anti-Semitism and Jewish life today, and connect the different researchers and increase research on a European level to have an applied form and a possibility for education also to draw on resources there. I think it's very important to work on this together with our partners. The strategy spells out clearly that Israel is a key partner for the EU, also in this fight, but more broadly, and that we cooperate with our international partners, those who are here and beyond, in different formats, and we really team up. I believe it's important to understand I focused on the cooperation with the member states in my previous intervention, but it is also really important for the EU. We want to lead this fight against anti-Semitism globally in cooperation with our partners. The strategy ends with the sentence, "Europe can only prosper when its Jewish community prospers too." And I think this is really the key and the heart of what we want to see, a Jewish community that prospers in the EU.
Thank you, Katerina. And we take from this session that we have to be focused, concrete, pragmatic, programmatic, and operational. And I would like to thank all our panel participants for being here today and providing a very unique behind-the-scenes look at the many actions being taken at the national and international levels to fight anti-Semitism. It is heartening to see the serious efforts you are spearheading, and we wish you only the greatest success. And we stand ready to assist you in any way we can. Nurit, I turn the program back to you now.
Israel has earned its now well-known reputation as a startup nation with an advanced high-tech sector admired worldwide. With us today now, an impressive group of entrepreneurs from a range of different sectors, helping to break down what exactly has driven that success and innovation. And more importantly, maybe what lessons can actually be learned for Ukraine, other nations, and Jewish communities worldwide. Taking part, Synthesis founder and co-CEO Inbal Arieli, CEO of Redefine Meat, Eshchar Ben Shitrit, co-founder of Tel Aviv University Ventures, Nimrod Cohen, and co-founder and CEO of C-Tree, Israel Talpaz. Tech is an issue near and dear to the heart of Jewish Confederation of Ukraine president and Kyiv Jewish Forum founder Boris Loshkin, a venture capitalist as well with many investments here in Israel. I'll let him take over the panel from here. Boris, welcome back.
Thank you, Nurit. Before we get to our panel, let's first hear a statement from Israel Talpaz, co-founder and the CEO of C-Tree, a digitally disruptive agricultural company.
Hello, shalom everyone. My name is Israel Talpaz. I'm the CEO and co-founder of C-Tree. Thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure and it's an honor. Firstly, I'd like to share with you some of my background. 5 years ago, I retired from 33 years in the Israeli intelligence and defense forces. Started at the age of 18 in operations, then intelligence, and then managerial roles and finally I retired about 5 years ago. And when I retired, I hooked up to my family background, which is agriculture. We're from a kibbutz in Israel. My father's been dealing with agriculture all of his life, and I really wanted to bring experience and capabilities and technologies and people to this world. Me and my partners, we all felt that we could bring and do a lot of good to the world of agriculture, and that's why we set up C3. C3 specializes in bringing data that we collect from drones and satellites and special vehicles to farmers all over the world. We use top cutting-edge artificial intelligence experts to analyze the data, and we provide farmers with insights and recommendations how to better perform in their farms and with every single tree that they have. And I think that this experience is a good example for why Israel, the state of Israel, is good in the world of startups and innovation. I think that we have three important components that make Israel what it is. One is the need. We don't have a lot of resources. We're small. We don't have water in Israel. We're a desert. And we have a lot of security problems. And so this forces us and forces the people to work together and innovate and be very creative in what we all do. Secondly is we get a very important experience at a young age. At 18, all of the boys and girls in Israel go to a military service of 2 or 3 years. And in this service, we learn a lot. We learn values, teamwork, professionalism, integrity, discipline. All of these are very important. Plus, we also gain very valuable experience. We succeed and we fail and we try and we deal with very difficult challenges, and it gives us the sense that we can do anything and we should try. And lastly, I think Israel has a very, very strong ecosystem of companies and groups that help companies form new ventures and take on very, very big challenges. And with this ecosystem that really encourages the young people to get together and do things, I think that it helps us and gets us to where we are today as a worldwide power in startups and in all of the different fields of technology and more. So to sum up, I think that the world can learn a lot from Israel. I think that any place where you take good people, you train them, you give them the values, you let them succeed and also let them fail, and you help them throughout the way, you encourage this as you go forward. The examples of the state of Israel can be all over the world, and I think that mankind really needs this to take on the big challenges that we all face. I really believe that this can be done. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Talpas, for those remarks. I have now in studio with me the CEO of Redefined Meat, Ishar Ben Shetrit, and the co-founder of Tel Aviv. Arieli. I'll start with you, Mr. Shetrit, CEO of Redefined Meat. Can you briefly explain what is your product and the thought process behind this creation?
Thank you, Boris. I'm very happy to be here and excited to share our story with this amazing community. We are a meat company, but instead of relying on animals, we rely on technology and sustainable ingredients. We develop and manufacture today high-quality beef products that are available in restaurants in Israel and now also in Europe, that are made using plant-based ingredients. So everything is plant-based, everything is sustainable, healthy. And instead of growing them in a cow, we use a 3D printing technology that we developed here in Israel that allows to recreate the function of the muscle of a cow, which is what we eat. The main reason to start the company is because I love meat and I stopped eating meat, so I want to go back to eating meat. But actually, we understood around 4 years ago that the meat industry is one of the most challenging industry on this planet. It's huge. It's $1.5 trillion, and it's hurting the planet because we don't have enough food, we don't have enough water, and there's not a lot of space. And cows actually consume more water, more space, and more food than all humanity, and creating more emissions than all the transportation sector. So we said, if we can bring to consumers the meat that they love without using an animal, we can have a great business with a great impact. It's very challenging because meat has been around for millennia and is a result of evolution, and we need to rely on technology, which is not an easy task, but Israel has a tradition of innovating in areas that the problem is big and the challenges are big. But if you can have a solution, it's good for the environment and a good business as well.
Thank you. Agricultural sector is an important part of Ukrainian economy. Do you see a threat from such projects like yours for traditional, classical agriculture?
We see actually an opportunity because if you look today on the meat industry, it's not very efficient, and most people in the supply chain are there because this is the legacy, in many cases family businesses, but they're not able to innovate and not meet with the innovation in other spaces. And actually, if you look at the efficiency of using resources in our industry, there is a lot of opportunity to grow higher value crops, to have more sustainable, nutritious and valuable way of manufacturing food, and to allow more people access to nutrition while optimizing food for human being versus food for animal feed. And we are working actually with people that have traditional meat businesses. We learn from them and we join with them to this journey. And we believe this is inevitable because consumers want to reduce their amount of meat intake. And we are providing with a better solution that also works with farmers and work with ingredient producers. The big meat companies around the world do see it as a threat, but it will take 20 to 30 years until we become the world's largest meat company, and we will need to rely on agriculture for that as well.
So Ukraine has 20, 30 years for its agriculture sector at least.
But they should start innovating now, otherwise other areas will transition into ingredients for alternative meat versus commodities for animal meat.
Can you suggest for Ukrainian tech investors, what should they do? Where should they invest in food tech?
In Israel, it's very easy because when we started, we had nothing, just a vision, and it was very easy for investors to understand the vision is big. Now there needs to be a transition from just a vision to good food product. But if you taste a good food product and a founder tells you this is going to be big and you like the product, you should invest. In food, technology is important, vision is important, but a good food product is the most amazing thing because you put it in the mouth of investors and you put it in the mouth of consumers and you cannot lie. But food tech is one of the most important revolution of our generation, in my opinion. We need to feed 10 billion people quite soon, and the world cannot support that without innovation, without technology, and without creativity and risk-taking.
And if old industries see you as a threat, it's probably a good sign that what you're doing is the right track.
Especially when it's such a big industry.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Bal Arieli, the author of well-known, I think the best book about not only Israeli tech, but about Israel character, Israel mindset, and which called Chutzpah. This book was published 2 years ago. And why Israel is a hub of innovation and entrepreneurship. It's the slogan of this book. And Ms. Arieli, can you explain how chutzpah skills, which are extremely important and it's a part of Israelis, could be exported to another countries?
Yes, definitely. And I'm very happy first to be joining you, although via Zoom. So the Israeli mindset, the Israeli entrepreneurial mindset, as you defined it through the book Chutzpah, is actually a collection of elements, personality and skills that I personally believe are universal. I agree. The Israeli story, the Israeli journey shows us how in Israel they are well developed. But I have to say, and it's extremely important for me to say, I do believe they can be actually fostered and practiced anywhere around the globe. So what do they comprise of? They actually comprise of a long list of soft skills that the World Economic Forum has actually defined as the skills for the future, ranging from complex problem solving, critical analysis, teamwork and emotional intelligence, entrepreneurial skills and innovative skills, but also a proactive approach and taking initiatives. And the list is long. There are about 17 skills that the World Economic Forum has defined as the skills for the future. And those skills are the skills in demand everywhere in the world. Now, in Israel, we've been privileged in a way because we, from a very young age, foster these skills. So when you look at the typical Israeli childhood, starting at very, very age, you will see these elements come to play on a day-to-day basis. It's not a strategy, it's not an educational methodology, it's just the way our society is built here in Israel and operates, and the setting that it actually enables to children from a very young age throughout their entire childhood. However, just like we said at the beginning, these are skills that can be practiced and can be strengthened. And I believe, just like muscles in our bodies, anyone can practice them. It's just a matter of awareness, intent, and a lot of hard work. I'm very happy to say that Chutzpah, this is the book in English, was actually acquired by a Ukrainian publisher in the name of Yakabuk. I hope I'm saying it correctly, and will be published in Ukraine by mid-2022. So we will have the chance to revisit this conversation with the book translated in Ukraine, and hopefully as many people as possible would be able to learn from the Israeli experience.
With pleasure. But can you explain how can entrepreneurs train these chutzpah skills, especially if they are not from Israel?
So there are many, many ways. And of course, it's like I said, it's a long list of capabilities and skills. It's not just one element. And it also depends on the stage, on the industry, on the goal of that specific individual, team, company, organization, or even country. So the first thing to understand is that there is no one specific formula that fits everyone. And that is a key element here. It's all about looking at the different elements and creating the optimal settings for them. And I can give you some examples. So for entrepreneurs and innovators, it would be about creating the dynamics where you can ask a lot of questions, where you actually do not follow best practices. Because if you follow best practices and if you follow existing knowledge and experience, your chances of disrupting, of creating something completely new, are very, very little. Another example is creating multidisciplinary teams, but not just as a cliche and slogan of diversity, but really putting effort and intent in creating teams that comprise of people who come from different backgrounds, even different professions, and have completely different views or angles of perspective on what they're trying to do. In Israel, we see that in the tech ecosystem, where many entrepreneurs transition from one industry to the other, and it's okay. So you could be a cyber entrepreneur or a cyber expert, and in 5 years start a healthcare company, and that would be just fine, assuming you're doing, of course, all the exploration and validation that is needed. that transition of talent from one industry to the other and the acceptance that we have here towards that transition is a key factor in the very rich diversity of innovation in Israel. Now, these are just two very concrete examples. There are many other examples, and I wish I could give you, a closed list of 5 things to do in the morning to become a chutzpahdik entrepreneur, but it requires a little more depth than that.
Thank you. Israel often called as a startup nation, but I've heard from my good friend from Israeli tech, the new definition, scale-up nation. What do you think about this?
So I think it's completely the present. We used to refer to ourselves and to be called the startup nation. Israel has the highest density of startups in the world. Said is a very entrepreneurial, innovative ecosystem. We used to think in the past that this is where our strength lies, and this is what we're capable of doing, creating a lot of innovation, starting and bringing the companies up to a certain phase. It's no longer true. Israel has today a lot in terms of proportions of scaled companies that have chosen to remain in Israel with their headquarters in Israel and to grow. And maybe the best data point for that are 2 elements. One, Israel has the highest number of companies listed on NASDAQ after the US and China. And this is in absolute numbers. So the highest representation of a foreign country other than China is Israel on NASDAQ, which is, of course, the most reputable, the golden standard of public traded platforms. And the second data point is even more interesting. Israel of 2021 has over 70 unicorns. So over 70 companies that are valued at above $1 billion, private companies. Now, if you go back to 2019, there were only 18 such companies. And if you go a little further to 2013, there was only 1 Israeli company, which was a unicorn. So in less than a decade, from 1 unicorn to over 70 unicorns, it shows the maturity of the tech ecosystem in Israel. And it demonstrates the fact that, just like we said before, it's all about awareness to skills and capabilities and practicing them. Israelis are capable of creating large companies, scaled companies. They just need to be intentful to that and to have the right experience. Today in 2021, starting 2022, there was even today on the news an article about the fact that the Israeli company of Mobileye will most probably go public next year at a valuation of $50 billion. So if that's not Scale-Up Nation, I don't know what is.
Great. Inbal, what is your next book about?
Oh, that's a great question. I have several ideas, but I'm currently focused on the chutzpah journey. It's being translated into a long list of languages. I'm extremely moved by each language and region I'm discovering through the book, and seeing how people from all over the world, young and more experienced entrepreneurs and other in tech and more traditional industries, how everyone is reacting to this universal approach to the entrepreneurial and creative chutzpah mindset. So for now, I'm enjoying this journey.
The natural next step would be going from startup to scale up, in case there is energy.
Thank you, Inbal. And now I would like to introduce Nimrod Cohen, the founder of Tel Aviv University Venture Fund. Have you already created your unicorn from the 70 Inbal already mentioned?
So actually I did, not from my previous role at Tau Ventures, but my previous role. So we have Yotpo, which is more than $1 billion company. We have Bring, which is more than $1 billion company. We have several more that hopefully in the next couple of weeks you're gonna hear of. But We'll see. I mean, unicorn is not something huge these days. I mean, just like another small news and a different website where I think this is one of the best things going on, which is not something that unique. It's just, something that's going on, and we see $10 billion companies and so on. So I think that's a great sign.
But why have you decided to launch the university established fund? Is it more profitable, more unicorns? What's the reason?
So actually, we are the first and only VC currently in Israel founded by university. But it's a huge trend going on mainly in the US, where you see leading universities establish investments vehicles like MIT, Stanford, Berkeley, and so on. And I think it's a combination of several reasons. Part of it is the fact that the university really want to be a main player in the early stage investments it's part of the reputation of the university, the branding of the university. It's about doing good. It's about supporting new technologies, students, alumni, and so on. But it's not about philanthropic. It's a real business. It's about making the best returns that we can to our investors. And I think it's a huge opportunity because as we see in other places around the world, it just makes sense. On the one hand, there are so many great things going on around universities in terms of students, alumni, technologies, and so on. So if you are part of a university, it gives you, as an investor, it gives you a real advantage because you are just there. You see opportunities that others just can't see. This is one part. The other part, as we all know, money these days is pretty much a commodity. The fact that you have money, it's almost meaningless. I mean, you can't win deals just because you have money or because you offer better valuation. I mean, the good entrepreneurs, they are not looking for that. They're looking to partner with those that can offer them things that money can't buy. And once you are part of a university, you have the ability to offer the entrepreneurs much more than just money. It's about the great connections that the university has all over the industry and academy and so on. It's about connecting them to the relevant knowledge around the university. It's about workforce, students from the university doing internship with our startups as part of their studying. It's about office space. It's about a community, ecosystem, and it's a real endless list. So at the end of the day, there's an economic behind it. It's totally for profit. But it serves many great things, not just about making money. It serves so many great things for the university, for Israel and as a country, for our entrepreneurs, for our investors. So we're really happy about that.
Thank you. Now more funds prefer late stage investments than seed investments or angel investments. What's the reason and why you are in seed stage? Is it more profitable or there is some other reasons?
So that's a good question. I think there's tons of money going on to the later stages because you see what's going on. You see, I mean, let's say a couple of years ago when you raised your round as a startup, after 18 months or 24 months, you raised your next round and so on and so on. Now everything is like on steroids. Everything's going faster. You see more IPOs, you see faster IPOs. So I guess many of those investors and much of this money is going to the later stage because they want to see liquidation events quicker. We feel there's a huge gap in the very early stage. I mean, everyone say that they invest early stage, but if you see the statistic, you see not many VCs really invest early stage. If you are an entrepreneur looking for $1 or $2 or $3 million, it will be harder for you to raise $1 or $2 million than raise $50 million. I mean, as weird as it sounds. So we identified this gap around those areas, and we feel that there are not many players around those stages. So we want to continue and support. We feel, I mean, it's not just about business. Obviously, it's business, but not about that. We feel it's crucial to support Israeli entrepreneurs and technologies in the very early stage, because without the early stage money, there will not be unicorns later on. I mean, there can be tons of money on the growth stage, but if you don't have babies, you don't have lawyers, doctors, and others, right? So it's pretty much the same thing. So this is part of the reason why they decided to stay in a very early stage.
That's true. And what sectors are most interesting for you now?
So I have to be honest, as a very early stage investor, I think that the product is a little bit overrated. I invested in 60 companies. I think all of them is doing something different than what they described when we invested in. It's because, I mean, that's life, you know. You think that you're doing something, then you see the competition, you meet your customers. I mean, things being changed. So for us, by far, the team is the most important part, because this is something that you really can't change and you don't want to change. The product can be changed tons of times. And so if we see a great team and the sector is interesting enough, so we're going to bet on them because we feel they're going to find a way to take part of this interesting market. So it's not just about the product, it's more about the team.
Okay. Ukrainian universities have very strong faculties of mathematics, physics, chemistry. Maybe it's time to go there and to launch, let's say, Kyiv Polytechnic, venture fund, etc.
I tell you a little secret. My dream was to create not our ventures, university ventures, because I really think it's a huge opportunity around there. But we started with Tau Ventures, but who knows? We'll see. Maybe next time we'll announce something much bigger.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for participation. Thank you for having us. And
so thank you for the opportunity. Hopefully next time maybe we'll visit Ukraine and we'll do it there.
With pleasure.
Thank you.
Wish you a great performance for your fund.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Inbal. Thank you for the participation in our forum, and I hope see you in Kyiv with a presentation of your book in Ukrainian.
Definitely, next year.
Thank you all so much for being here today and taking part in this. I hope our viewers came away with a deeper and more nuanced understanding of the Israeli high-tech success story, and that its lessons can be applied elsewhere to foster entrepreneurship and economic prosperity. Now I will turn the program back over to our host, Nurit.
Thanks very much. And our next session hits on the challenge that has largely defined all of our lives for almost 2 years now, the COVID-19 pandemic. Our next speakers will tell us how both Ukraine and Israel are fighting the pandemic and how their collaboration in the broader field of health is changing lives. First up is Dr. Viktor Liashko. He has served as Ukraine's Minister of Health since May 2021, helping guide the country through the massive challenges of dealing with the pandemic. He has a Master's of Public Administration in the field of healthcare and previously led the State Sanitary and Epidemiological Service of Ukraine. He joins us on his experiences from the front line of this global story.
Шановні гості та учасники форуму, користуючись нагодою, хочу подякувати уряду держави Ізраїль за підтримку у боротьбі з пандемією COVID-19 та сприянню нашим спільним ініціативам щодо розвитку медичної системи України. Всіх цікавить відповідь на одне і те ж запитання – коли ця пандемія закінчиться? Неприємна новина в тому, що COVID-19 може не зникнути ніколи. Хороша новина – ми можемо повернутися до нормального життя із циркуляцією цього вірусу поміж нами. Все більше науковців натякають, що ковід стане ендемічною хворобою. А це потребуватиме від нас нових протиепідемічних заходів, які відрізняються від тих, що були на початку епідемії. Хвилі обмежень і локдаунів у світі після того, як було оголошено про появу SARS-CoV-2, мали зрозумілу мету – запобігти поширенню коронавірусної хвороби, зменшити кількість інфікованих та врятувати медичні системи від колапсу. Сьогодні потрібно визнати – запобігти поширенню коронавірусу по світу не вдалося. SARS-CoV-2 не тільки живе в людській популяції на всіх континентах, він ще й підлаштовується до умов перебування за допомогою мутацій. Але позитивним є те, що всі наші реагування на всі ці мутації складаються не лише з гасіння пожеж. За 1,5 року перебування в постійній турбулентності і в світі, і в Україні вже зроблено ряд інвестицій в систему охорони здоров'я, які сьогодні вже дозволяють підвищити готовність для наступних глобальних та місцевих викликів. Пандемія COVID-19 стала каталізатором важливих змін в системах охорони здоров'я, пришвидшила раніше заплановані ініціативи та реформи, спрямовані на досягнення цілей універсального доступу до послуг охорони здоров'я. Маю надію, що уроки, які людство винесе по завершенню пандемії, стануть рушійною силою для подальшого розвитку та здійснення реформ у сфері охорони здоров'я. Незважаючи на непростий пандемічний рік, ми продовжуємо в Україні медичну реформу та працюємо над стратегією розвитку системи охорони здоров'я 2030, яка буде представлена Міністерством охорони здоров'я у грудні цього року. Враховуючи передовий досвід у вакцинації, зокрема і Ізраїлю, Україні вдалося пройти пік захворюваності самої тяжкої хвилі COVID-19 без введення загальнонаціонального локдауну. Сьогодні у нас триває кампанія з вакцинації, і ми впевнено вийшли на середньоєвропейські рівні вакцинації та продовжуємо нарощувати її темпи. Україна наближається до цілей Всесвітньої організації охорони здоров'я з вакцинації 40% дорослого населення до кінця 2021 року. Незважаючи на те, що епідемічна ситуація у світі не дозволяє нам повернутися у доковідні часи, Україна зробила максимально безпечним та зручним цьогорічне святкування Рош ха-Шана в Умані, розуміючи важливість збереження культурних надбань і традицій. Сьогодні, як ніколи, важлива консолідація та підтримка світової спільноти у боротьбі з пандемією. Соціальна відповідальність має стати гарантією безперешкодного доступу до вакцинації в усьому світі. Спільними зусиллями можна подолати будь-які виклики. Дякую за увагу.
Thank you so much to Minister Liashko. And really playing a similar role right here in Israel is Professor Salman Zarka, a physician and the Israeli Health Ministry's chief COVID-19 officer. Professor Zarka, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Hi.
So you are carrying an enormous responsibility shared by counterparts around the world, really helping to set the country's policies for handling this pandemic. First off, how concerned are you about the Omicron variant? I mean, there is a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of uncertainty at this point in time. What's your take?
Really, after about 2 years with the pandemic, I can say it very clear that a lot of our mission are dealing with uncertainty. Unfortunately, the virus does not behave according to our plans, our orders, and in many cases, we have to react before it become late. New variant arose at the South Africa, and we have to wait our different steps that we could use to deal with this new uncertainty. At the moment, we still lack concrete and systematic information regarding the characteristics of the Omicron variant. We need more data about 3 issues. The first one, it's its infectivity and how easily it spreads. It seems that this issue, this variant is more infective than the Delta, and we are worried about that. The second issue is to understand its violence and the severity of the illness it causes. We still need more data about that. And the third issue, it's really special attention is to understand the immune evasion that still remains unclear. Although it seems that people who are vaccinated and protected will get a mild illness, but we need more data about this issue. We hope that from South Africa, maybe from the United Kingdom, we will have more data. It seems that we need another 1 week till 2 weeks to be more sure about this new variant. We are in Israel have already 21 cases, many of which are fully vaccinated, include a booster shot, and all of them have mild symptoms. And we hope that we can have these answers, this important data, in order to calculate our steps for the next 2 weeks.
Professor Zarka, as you mentioned, you're heading into, facing this new variant after quite a bit of experience, really, with different approaches, with lockdowns, with opening up, with vaccines, of course. Has your perspective, how has it changed over the course of the last year and a half in terms of how to deal with a moment like this when we're faced with a new variant?
I think all of us have to understand that the emergence of Omicron, all of us have to realize that we have to live with the corona and to have to find our new life, understanding that the corona is here and it will still here, and we need to think about other facilities, other way of life in order to continue our life. During the 2 years, we have witnessed many new variants. During the pandemic, many of them did not have any public health impact, while several successful variants, all of us are familiar with Alpha, Beta, today Delta, and Omicron. And we have to understand that this virus and these variants are part of our life, and we have to be ready for such a new one that will cause more illness at our country and all over the world. 3 weeks ago, hoping we are getting out of our fourth wave with the Delta, we had a big drill. We called it Omega, was the name of the new virus that invaded our country. And the drill made some issues very clear to all of the staff dealing with the policy regarding the pandemic. We understand that when there is a new threat, it is better to act strongly and then release than wait and see. I think this is what we tried to do here in Israel in the last 10 days, to close borders, to be more in a high alert, and to have more data in order to decide what to release and how to release. I think, again, after the 3 waves at Israel, the best weapon in order to deal with the pandemic, in order to deal with COVID-19, is and is still the vaccine. People need to be protected against this virus. The vaccine does not help protect us 100%, and we need another facilities such as like mask to be aware about the risk at the community, with the environment, and to try everybody to minimize his risk by avoiding crowded area and take some meters away from others. I believe that this policy will still relevant, whereas the current vaccine is good enough for the Omicron, or we need to update the dose or the vaccine. I believe that in any scenario, we have to understand that COVID-19 is here, it is still here, and we have to think about our new style of life in order to continue to achieve our goals, our missions, and our dreams.
Right.
There is no time to waste waiting till COVID-19 leaves our world, and this is our new world, and we can do well, although the virus is here.
Adjusting to a new reality. If anyone is under the illusion that this is behind us, I think you've made clear that that is just an illusion. It is a new way of life. Let me just ask you one final question. You've given us some very important takeaways about how to deal with new variants in this pandemic. The pandemic has also, as you know, I'm sure better than anyone, put health systems under pressure that they have never experienced before. Do you have any sort of takeaways, bigger picture, that you would recommend going forward, lessons learned, things that might need to be implemented in the future?
I think we have many lessons learned from the experience with the pandemic at Israel and all over the world. Maybe the most important one is that our health system have to be flexible and with the ability for scalability in order to cope with these waves of disease and changing the magnitude according to the situation. I think such flexibility and scalability are needed across all the areas of the health system, including physical infrastructure, such like ICU beds, medical equipment, and the most important is the people, is the healthcare personnel. The pandemic demonstrated really the importance of having a strong community-based component in the health system. In addition to the acute care hospitals, the majority of the patient will be managed in primary care, and I think we have to strengthen the community care in order to relieve the pressure on the hospital system by reducing the referrals and preventing the hospital admissions. Somehow to do it with having more vaccination rate at the community. I think also the pandemic highlighted the existing health inequalities in many countries, especially in vulnerable population that reduce access to healthcare. Maybe we have to deal with 1 month of emergency. It's differ from already 2 years that we need our facilities in order to deal with Corona, with the COVID-19, but other patients, non-COVID patients, need many facilities and they need their care, especially with cases, with severe cases that need surgery, that need chemical treatment, and so on. I'm not familiar with the Ukraine health system, but I really believe that our lessons and their lessons is important for all of us and for many countries all over the world. You know, for many years, I dealt with security emergency scenarios regarding our borders at the north of Israel as the director of Ziv Medical Center. And I really believe that there is big similarity also with secure missions, but dealing with pandemia for this long time, we never had such a secure mission at Israel. So I believe all of us can share knowledge, can share experience, and can do together in order to make it better and to try to have our life back with the COVID-19, but to continue doing what we want to do.
Absolutely. Well, this is exactly the forum to do that. And really, as you say, if at least lessons can be learned and changes made as a result of this pandemic, then that's one positive thing to come out of this massive change to all of our lives over the last couple of years. Professor Salman Zarqa, thanks so much for being with us and sharing all that knowledge you've picked up over this last period.
Thank you very much. Wishing you Hanukkah Sameach and Happy New Year.
And before we come to a close here, we'll turn focus to another area that has massive implications for Israel, Ukraine, and Jewish communities worldwide: education. It's, of course, played a key role in preserving the Jewish religion, culture, values, and history over the centuries. And it's also crucial in fighting the anti-Semitism that has persisted throughout the centuries and is still alive and well today. And now we welcome back Chief Rabbi of Ukraine, Yaakov Bleich. Also joining this conversation on education and technology are Bishop Dr. Boris Gudzak, President of Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, and Dan Green, Director General and CEO of World ORT. Rabbi Bleich, let me start with you. Can you tell us how, in your eyes, in your experience, how Jewish education in Ukraine has really changed during your time there over the last 30 years?
Yeah, changed. First of all, thank you very, very much and for hosting this beautiful forum and this great panel. Jewish education didn't exist during the time of the Soviet Union. So it changed a lot over the last 30 years since the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Ukraine became independent and immediately Jewish schools started opening with government support. I think that it's the most important element of community building is Jewish education. If we don't have young ones, we won't have elders. That's something that our sages taught us. Im ein gdeim lo yu tiashim. So this is very, very important for us to build a community on the basis of Jewish education. I think it's much stronger, and it makes the community much stronger since you have young people growing up and learning about their Jewish identity. What's interesting is that Jewish identity, I always say, was very strong even under the Soviet Union. But under the Soviet Union, that Jewish identity, which was very strong, was a negative identity. People were embarrassed. They suffered for being Jewish. However, ultimately, that is what caused them to send their children to Jewish schools, to learn the positive identity and learn what Judaism really means and what it means for them. I would say 100% of the Jewish children that came to Jewish schools in the first years of Ukrainian independence came because their parents suffered for being Jewish. And the parents wanted them to have a positive experience being Jewish and to understand their Judaism. So there's no question about it that Jewish education is what helped create a strong and vibrant Jewish community in Ukraine. And indeed, I think throughout the world, I think that that's the most important element of any community is the Jewish education part.
Well, on that note, I want to ask Dr. Gudzak, your university recently created a Jewish studies program there. I mean, tell us a little bit about that program itself and really the thought process behind its establishment.
The Jewish Studies program at the Ukrainian Catholic University has behind it a deep conviction that we are brothers in the human race, brothers and sisters, Christians and Jews, and that the Jews are our older brothers in kind of the biblical faith, and that there is incredibly rich, sometimes dramatic, sometimes tragic, but also promising history and legacy of the life of Christians and Jews on this land. So this program has three components. There's the comparative Christian and Jewish study of the Tanakh, what Christians call the Old Testament. Then there is, and that is headed by the Dean of the Theology Faculty, Father Yuri Shurko. Then there's a program on Jewish Ukrainian history in Ukraine, headed by one of the top public intellectuals of Ukraine, Professor Yaroslav Hrytsak. And then a program of contemporary Ukrainian Jewish, Christian, Judaic relations. And that program is headed by the highly decorated former Soviet dissident, Miroslav Marinovich. And so these programs foster conferences, research, publications, but also classwork for students in different programs. The Ukrainian Catholic University has spurred the interest of young people in Yiddish. We have some students that are doing doctoral degrees, writing dissertations on topics of Jewish history in Ukraine. So this has been an important kind of priority in the university's attempt to help people in the 21st century, especially in this part of the world, have an authentic, rich, multifaceted, non-deprived self-awareness.
And what an important initiative that is. I want to come back to that in just a moment. But first, Mr. Green, let me ask you, I mean, it's really hard to talk about education, certainly education and technology today without thinking about COVID, the post-COVID, if we can say that even, impact on education. What have you witnessed in terms of the impact on your Jewish schools and colleges in Israel and in the diaspora?
Thank you, Nurit. Well, you really have to consider our network, which consists of more than 200,000 beneficiaries across more than 30 countries around the world, consisting of kindergartens, junior and high schools, technical colleges, universities, and adult learning and training centers. So the impact of COVID and the need that resulted from it really differs right across the network. But firstly, you have to talk about the response of our staff, of our teachers. The late Jonathan Sachs always called educators the heroes of the Jewish people who really shape our life. And all of our teachers acted so heroically during this most challenging and frightening and difficult time. But also there were unsought positives and opportunities that we found. And because of Orton, our network, our global network, we're really, I suppose our USB is about that network and about that opportunity that we provide for valuable connections. And especially, I think we saw this with our smaller and more isolated communities. We're giving young people and students the chance really to develop a sense of Jewish peoplehood by connecting so much more. We ran so many collaborative projects for students to work with their global peers, virtual summer schools, virtual 3D workshops, making animated films and many other things, and also investing our time in virtual teacher training as well, and allowing our teachers, our professionals to come together and discuss issues that they were, suffering from, and how to share ideas about how to move forward beyond the pandemic. But there's been so many different factors to consider for education generally at this time. And the crisis, I think, has definitely strengthened links between parents and teachers. Studies that we've seen have certainly shown that this relationship, this strengthening, certainly increases attendance and can push up results as well. So that's a positive. And another small positive that we've seen is that some students appear to have performed better while studying remotely. Perhaps those who suffer from anxiety, pupils who are shy about speaking up in class and find chat boxes less intimidating. So online learning has certainly helped some bright children who perhaps are self-motivated, enjoy learning, but find social aspects of schooling exhausting. And another significant factor to consider is coming to terms really with the size of the learning loss suffered by students. Realizing that many have fallen behind by being out of the classroom. So what more can we do to help them reach the levels of attainment that expected of them? And finally, I just add here, we need to really do more to develop the resilience in children, helping them cope with dramatic shocks like this. So schools really have to be helping their students to learn independently, perhaps in preparation for their future work lives where technological disruptions can be a thing of the norm. And you might have to pivot and change your career and retrain at a moment's notice. And I think this better reflects the modern workplace our students will enter when they graduate. And just to finish really here, school is so much more than just learning. The socialization side of it is huge. And we can't, place enough emphasis on the fact that we want our students back in the classroom with their teachers face to face, moving away from the virtual as much as possible to get them back to that human contact.
Yeah, what a task you have to manage the impact of something that came so suddenly, and everybody really had to learn on their feet in such a dramatic way. And part of what you're saying recalls what we've also heard today in terms of even the healthcare system after COVID is flexibility and the need for more flexibility in terms of how to adjust to these kinds of scenarios. And like you said, to help those kids through it going forward. I imagine it's not the last time we'll be facing this. Let me ask you, Rabbi Bleich, when we're talking about education, there's obviously the issue of anti-Semitism, the importance of education in fighting anti-Semitism. Overall, when we're looking at Ukraine, what do you think sets apart Jewish education there versus other diaspora communities?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, and I think that this is something that has to really be taken into consideration, people ask me, what is the future of the Jewish community in Ukraine? And I like to say that the future of the Jewish community in Ukraine will be approximately similar to Jewish communities in Western Europe. However, we have one tremendous advantage over Jewish communities in Western Europe. And that is, as we began rebuilding with the independence of Ukraine 30 years ago, we immediately opened Jewish schools. And the Jewish education that we are offering to the children in our communities are the basis of rebuilding our communities. So we have a much more educated and interested community compared, let's say, to the French Jews who seek after World War II maybe to assimilate more, or the German Jews who seek to assimilate more, and the Belgian Jews, etc., in Western Europe. So even though they have Jewish education as well, but I don't think that their Jewish education came to establish and build their communities, especially in Germany, where the Jewish education there today is more of an afterthought after the emigration of Jews from the Soviet Union and former Soviet Union into Germany. So I see the education in Ukraine as a very, very strong foundation for the building of a community. And we almost do not have a community with over 10,000 members that doesn't have a Jewish day school, which is very unique for diaspora communities. And the reason is because we built our identity and our communities on education. So education is very, very important for number one. Another very important point, there is now a movement in European Jewish day schools headed by the Lauder Foundation and other organizations, which are educating for impact, which means taking a Jewish day school and saying, what is the education for these children going to do to impact the community? Are we teaching these children that they have to be a part of the community? Or are we giving them Jewish identity, quote unquote, which does not obligate them to do anything other than to feel Jewish? When you educate for impact and you understand that you're educating Jewish children not only to feel Jewish, but to do something about it, to join their community and to make sure that their community will be a stronger and a better community, you're obviously educating not only as a goal for knowledge, but also for what we call in Ukrainian tachlis, which is that you want to get some result out of that education, which will impact the Jewish community. So Jewish schools in Ukraine are great schools. They are really strong. They have a lot of support from the government as well. They work together to strengthen the content of the education in the schools. And we have schools that are run by different organizations, including ORT and Chabad and Shema Yisrael. These are the networks that run schools in Ukraine, and they're very, very successful. And I think that they're successful because they are, like I said, they are the foundation of the community. Right. Another important point that I want to add, having heard my good friend and colleague, Metropolitan Huziak, the fact that the Ukrainian Catholic University today has opened a Jewish studies program, something that I think would not have been possible 30 years ago or 25 years ago. It shows a lot about the social atmosphere within Ukraine today. We speak about anti-Semitism and education and how education combats anti-Semitism. There's no question about it that the fact that we are able to sit and discuss openly Jewish history in Ukraine and understand that there were good times and bad times. And even though the good times were so much stronger, more, almost out of 1,000 years, I would say that 950 years were good times and 50 years were bad times, or 50 or 60 years between all of the history of Jewish life in Ukraine. The fact that we're able to get together now and discuss these things helps us focus on the proper perspective. What have we learned from one another? What can we learn from one another? What good things are there in our history? And this allows us to work together to combat anti-Semitism. Most anti-Semitism comes from a lack of education. And the fact that the Jews are educated and a part of society in Ukraine, the fact that Ukrainian society is developing in a democratic way, in a democratic fashion, this allows interaction and respect, and allows us to respect one another to the extent that if, God forbid, there are acts of anti-Semitism, it doesn't have to be the Jews that are speaking out against it, but it's Ukrainian society as a whole that will stand up to it. This is, I think, one of the greatest things that Jewish education and education in general has done for Ukraine.
Yeah, that sort of harks back to the talk about the importance of interfaith initiatives that Ilan Carr was telling about earlier. I mean, what a perfect example of that. So let me take that a step further. Dr. Gudzak, as someone from inside the university, what do you think it says about Ukraine's relationship with its Jewish community that it has reached a point where a Catholic university opens a Jewish studies program?
I find Ukrainian society to be really, really a very flexible, dynamic, and open place. I think maybe everybody that is listening knows, but might not remember that a Ukrainian Jew is the president of this country. And 75% of Ukrainians voted for him. In fact, in 2019, there was a period when both the president and the prime minister of Ukraine were Ukrainian Jews. Besides Israel, there was no state in the world that could say that. The head of government and the head of state were Jews in Ukraine. And the current president remains. It's just half of his 5-year term. I think it's, we're living in a world where a holistic approach to life, to the human being, looking at a person to be educated, not only as a brain, as a computer that needs to be programmed, but somebody with a heart, with a soul, with a body, with a culture. And looking at that person in the context of a local and global society. Today, we can't live without a healthy awareness of our brothers and sisters who are very diverse in this world. And our Christian calling, our spiritual calling, our human calling is to live in peace, to live in harmony, to live in a way that fosters creativity and livelihood I was born and raised in the United States, did most of my studies there, but also in Western Europe. And I found the experience of developing a Catholic university, the only Catholic university between Japan and Poland, kind of in the northern Eurasian landmass, to be a fantastic experience. I don't think this kind of university could have been developed in too many places or too many countries. There's a lot still to do. There's deep post-genocidal, post-totalitarian trauma. I mean, at least 15 million people were killed in Ukraine between 1919 and 1955. It was the most dangerous place on earth between 1932 and 1945 for Ukrainians, for Jews, for Poles living here, for Russians, for Gypsies, etc. It was a place where the brown and red totalitarians met, clashed, and we see right now, today, there's a very important moment. I didn't hear yet the results of the Putin-Biden conversation, but the danger is not gone. So the fear, which almost became genetic from this wave after wave of genocide, this generation after generation of totalitarianism, this trauma needs to be cured, and that can only be cured by healthy relationships, by love, by really respecting the dignity of the other person. And every person is created in God's image and likeness. And that is what I think the Maidans, the two Ukrainian revolutions, the Orange Revolution and the Revolution of Dignity showed, when all ethnic backgrounds and all religious confessions were together, standing up for human dignity. And I think this really put a stamp on the future of Ukraine. This is the kind of Ukraine people want in this country, at least a majority of people.
It's a beautiful example, I think, that others can learn from too, and beautifully put in how you described it, that deep trauma, and that actually to move forward, you have to face it, to face history, which Ukraine has certainly done over the past few decades. The independent Ukraine, and then to learn about each other and be willing to know the other, so to speak, and not sort of, push it aside and put it under the rug. So I think that's a really beautiful example and a beautiful way to start to bring this forum to a close. And before we do that, Mr. Green, let me just ask you about how your schools also on a sort of practical level, combine Jewish studies, Jewish curricula with the more generalized studies?
Well, two of our core values at Worldor are Tikkun Olam and Tikkun Am. And most of us are familiar with the concept of Tikkun Olam around social justice, humanitarian aid, and having a global worldview to solving these issues around the environment, sustainability, and equality. And Worldor embraces this, as do our students and all our programs. But we also want our students to be equally committed to Hebrew culture, to Klal Yisrael, and to Jewish practice. And this fusion, if you like, of our two core values perhaps underlines the balance that we have to strike in many of our schools around the world, and nowhere really more so, I suppose, than in Ukraine and across the former Soviet Union. And by investing in Tikkun Am, this kind of strengthening and flourishing of Jewish people, we're enabling the sustainable flourishing of Jewish people through identity, culture, community, religion, and state. We're engaging young people as proud, knowledgeable, and engaged Jews, building Jewish identity, community, and leadership development. And that ultimately leads, I think, to a sustainable diaspora community. Because for all schools in this region, they really are often the primary source of Jewish affiliation for many students and their families. So how do we get them in? Because we find across the former Soviet Union that many Jewish parents are motivated first by the best possible education, and only second by the Jewish component. So we have to compete every time with the very best citywide schools to attract Jewish families. And that's our challenge and ensures our commitment to excellence. And once we have the students, then the magic can start. The Jewish spark is rekindled, and soon the flame burns brightly as the child returns home with Shabbat songs and Hanukkah dreidels and brachot and questions. And soon the parents and grandparents have also caught fire, and the Jewish flame, often hidden for generations, sits proudly represented as Shabbat candles every Friday night, or the Havdalah flame, or 8 candles on the menorah. So we have to fuse that Jewish experience with what we're known for, our excellence in science and technology and STEM education today. And that mix of STEM and Yiddishkeit for us is really that perfect recipe in order to ensure that we can build our Jewish communities, ensure that Jewish families choose our schools so that they can go home with that love of Judaism and Yiddishkeit.
Well, Mr. Dan Green, Bishop Dr. Boris Gudzak, and Rabbi Bleich, thank you all so much for this conversation. I have to say it's a pleasure to hear many words of encouragement and examples to help bring this two-day forum to an end. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
God bless you. Thank you.
And on that note, we've come to the end of the 2021 Kyiv Jewish Forum, hosted by the Jewish Confederation of Ukraine, the Center for Jewish Impact, and the Combat Antisemitism Movement. Remember, if you missed anything over these 2 days, you'll be getting a recap in your inbox, and a full recording will be online soon on the forum's website, KyievJewishForum.com. And for some final thoughts, let's hear once more from Jewish Confederation of Ukraine President Boris Loshkin.
Thank you, Nurit. Dear friends, our third Kyiv Jewish Forum has come to an end. Every time announcing the closure of the regular Kyiv Jewish Forum, the feeling states that not everything has been said, not all important issues have been discussed. Someone or something has received less attention than deserved. This is good, as this means that we will have a reason to get together again and finish the unsaid discuss new issues that we will accumulate over the next year. I would like to thank everyone who helped organize and conduct the current Kyiv Jewish Forum. Center for Jewish Impact and its founder, Robert Zinger, Combat Antisemitism Movement, Eurasian Jewish Congress, and its president, Mikhail Mirelashvili. I would also like to thank our distinguished speakers and guests of the Kyiv Jewish Forum, whose speeches and debates have made our forum so interesting and useful. President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, President of State of Israel, Isaac Herzog, Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal, President of the World Jewish Congress, Ronald Lauder, European Commission Coordinator on Combating Antisemitism, Katarina von Schubern, Danny Dayan, Chairman of the Yad Vashem, members of the governments and parliaments of Israel, Ukraine, USA, Canada, countries of European Union, scientists, representatives of business structures, public organizations, and everyone who has taken part in the Kyiv Jewish Forum. I also cannot but express my gratitude to our media partners, with whose help the audience of Kyiv Jewish Forum is growing every year. Our coverage of the events of the third Kyiv Jewish Forum was held by the Jerusalem Post, Times of Israel, Jewish Telegraphic Agency, Новое Время, RBC Ukraine, Обозреватель, and LBUA. I would especially like to thank the viewers of the Kyiv Jewish Forum. How effectively we will cope with the threat of growing anti-Semitism? What should other countries learn from the successful experience of Israel? First of all, how to make Jews around the world even more united and through education, give the world more democracy, accelerate progress, make the world more successful. Why Israel is the center of innovations and entrepreneurs. We have discussed all this and a lot of other issues during today's. Thank you all and see you at the 4th Kyiv Jewish Forum.
Thanks so much, Mr. Loshkin, and of course for making this panel happen. And once again, I'm Nurit Ben. It really has been a pleasure hosting this forum, these conversations. The discussions have been thought-provoking, also practical, and we hope they'll serve as a launching point for effectively addressing the whole range of critical issues facing Ukraine, Israel, and the Jewish world. Thanks so much for being with us, and we hope to see you again next year.